this Armenian guy is about to get murdered. This Jewish official comes along and starts mocking him. He met a Jewish man who was also working with the Ottomans, and in fact, he was a Fink, and he would rat out the Armenians to the Ottoman authorities so that those Armenians would be killed. So this Jewish guy was a murderer. He murdered Armenians. There was a Jewish guy, and he approaches Grigoris Balakian, and he says, "Oh, Father Grigoris, don't you want to convert to Islam so you can survive?" So we shouldn't go around saying, well, that's just the Jews. But at the same time, we have to acknowledge historical reality. There were Jewish people who were involved in the Armenian Genocide. All right, everyone. So I want to talk to you guys about something that I find quite interesting, and this pertains to something that I've been reading about, and that is the Armenian Genocide. Here is something that I did not know about the Armenian Genocide until very, very recently, and that is that there were actually Jewish people who were involved in the Armenian Genocide. No one ever really talks about this, but here I am. This is what I'm here for. I'm here to tell you guys about things that you've never really heard of. So, in this book, I've been reading this book, Armenian Golgotha, by Grigoris Balakian. And Grigoris Balakian survived the Armenian Genocide. He went through it, and there are chunks of this book, there are portions of this book, which he wrote while he was going through Turkish Ottoman oppression. And so really, this is a first-hand account of the Armenian Genocide. For all you people out there who deny the Armenian Genocide, actually take the time to read an account by someone who actually survived it. But anyway, Grigoris Balakian, he talks about how there were several Jewish people who were working with the Turks, and he talks about them from his own personal experience. And there was a Jewish official who worked for the Ottoman Empire, and he didn't really like the Armenians. And there was an Armenian guy that he especially hated. This Armenian man was named Hamamjian. Hamamjian was working for the German railway company that was constructing the Berlin to Baghdad railway. This was a railway system that the Ottoman Empire desperately needed to be built because they needed the railway system to deliver their munitions, their supplies, to deliver soldiers, to transport soldiers to the battlefields where they were fighting the Russians and the British. When World War I broke out, the railway was not completed. And so the Ottoman Empire was very desperate to have the railway completed, and the German government said, okay, well, we'll build the railway for you, we'll complete the railway for you, but you guys cannot interfere with what we are doing as far as constructing the railway goes. And that means that we are going to hire Armenian labor. We are going to hire Armenian workers. And we know that you want to kill the Armenians, but you're not going to be killing our workers because we need all of the manpower that we can get. And so the Ottomans said, okay, fine, we won't touch the Armenian workers who you hire. And so a lot of Armenians were fleeing to the railway construction sites to get jobs working for the Germans so that they would be protected from the Ottoman reign of terror. And so a lot of Armenians were working in these construction sites. But the Ottoman Empire was bent on murdering these workers, regardless of the objections of some German engineers. The German government, at the end of the day, did not stop the Ottomans from murdering these workers because the Germans wanted to maintain their alliance with the Turks, because the Turks were a major enemy of the Russians, and the Russians, as we all know, have been the arch nemesis of the Germans. And so the Germans did not want to lose their alliance with the Turks, and the Turks said, listen, we want to murder every single Armenian. We want to kill all of them. They all have to die, including all of your workers. And the German government, the German militarists in the government said, okay, go ahead. We're not going to stop you. And there were German engineers, and he named some of them. One of them was named Klaus. He doesn't give his last name. He just calls him Klaus. And Klaus was a very righteous man. He was a Christian, and he was an engineer. And he really wanted to protect his Armenian workers, but at the end of the day, there was nothing he really could do to stop the Ottomans from murdering these Armenian laborers. And so there was one particular Armenian laborer by the name of Hamam Jian. And Hamam Jian was told, you have to go and be marched to your death. The Turks would do these death marches. That's how they killed a lot of Armenians. They would do death marches like the Japanese would do. The Japanese did their Bataan death march. And so the Ottomans, they came up with a way to kill a lot of people in a way where they could say that it wasn't their fault. And so they would just march people to their deaths. They would force them to march for weeks and weeks and weeks, and then they would starve to death, or they would just be exhausted, or they would be murdered by marauders who were really commissioned by the state to murder these Armenians. But they were technically marauders. They were listed as marauders so that in the future, if the Ottoman authorities ever got caught, they could say, well, they were murdered by criminals. Well, you know, they just starved to death. It wasn't our fault. We were simply just transporting them so that they could have their Armenian state. And this is the type of deception and subterfuge that the Ottomans utilized. It's all very, very evil and sinister. So, going back to this worker, Hamam Jian was an Armenian worker. He was working at this construction site in the Amanos Mountains, and he was told, you have to be marched to your death. That's it. So he knew that he was going to be martyred. He knew that his end was nigh. And there was a Jewish guy who came around. And think about it, this Armenian guy is about to get murdered. And this Jewish official comes along and starts mocking him. He tells this Armenian man, certainly we will see each other in Constantinople after the war. So he is sarcastically telling this man, before he is about to be forced into his death, into his brutal death, oh, we'll see each other in Constantinople next year in Constantinople. You know that saying that they have, next year in Jerusalem, next year in Constantinople. And this Jewish official knows damn well that this man is about to be murdered. He doesn't give a shit. He wants to mock the man before he dies, before he is brutally killed. And Hamam Jian gracefully absorbs the scoffing. He gracefully deals with the scoffing, and he turns around. And I mean, you can just imagine this. It's almost like a scene from a movie. Hamam Jian is about to die. He tells this priest, Grigoris Balakian, could you please take care of my kids if you ever see them? And he sees a photograph of his wife and kids. He kisses the photo. He takes a little knapsack and he puts whatever belongings he can put in the knapsack because he's about to be forced to go through a death march. And he puts his little knapsack on his shoulder and he's about to go walk to his death. And there's this guy, this Jewish official, and he says, next year in Constantinople. And he's mocking him in this very sadistic way, this very degenerate and evil way. And this Armenian man turns around and he says, be glad I am going to my death. They are cleaning up the Armenians. The field is left to the Jews. And I'm not exactly certain as to how to interpret this line. It's very profound. He says, be glad I am going to my death. They are cleaning up the Armenians. The field is left to the Jews. And I'm reading this and I'm thinking to myself, is this guy being prophetic? Is he predicting the Holocaust? Is he saying, listen, they're killing us. They're clearing the fields of Armenians. They're purging the fields of Armenians, but the field will be left for the Jews, and they're going to purge the field of you guys in the future. Is this what this man is saying? It's very, very profound. I mean, either way, it's a very profound story. The way he just turns around and tells this scoffer, the field is left to the Jews. And he just goes to the march, and he goes to his death. And reading this story, it just reminded me of the story of Christ. Christ is on the cross, and there are these Jewish religious leaders saying, well, if you really are the Son of God, Jesus, why don't you just get off the cross? Just take yourself down off the cross. And the gospel tells us that as Jesus was dying on the cross, the two thieves were mocking him. That's what it says in one of the Gospels. It says, and the two thieves were mocking him. We're used to hearing about one part of the story where it says there was a penitent thief and then there was a scoffing thief. But before that, both thieves were mocking Christ. Both of them were. And then one of them had a change of heart and became penitent. And he told the scoffer, he said, don't you understand that we deserve what we are getting, but this man is innocent and he is being punished for no reason? And so what is this? This is an illustration that demonstrates the difference between the scoffer and the righteous. They are the scoffers. The Bible warns against the scoffers. The scoffers, they replicate their father, the devil. They mimic, they emulate the demons that they follow. They scoff because they want to manipulate people, they want to hurt people, they want to psychologically torment people because the demons love to torment humanity. And the demons love tormenting humans. They love to see mankind murder himself. They love to see people kill each other. They love to see genocides. They love to see bloodshed. They don't give a damn if it's Muslims being killed, if it's Jews being killed, if it's Christians. They love to see humans being murdered. And they love it when the victims are scoffed while they are suffering. And you see the followers of the demons. You see the children, if you will, of Belial, the sons of Belial, as the Bible calls them, acting like the demons, scoffing and mocking and making fun of people's suffering. You see this sort of thing. And it reminds me of that story in the book of Genesis, where here is Noah, and he just got off the ark, he's been through the flood, and he is suffering. He's lamenting about the destruction of humanity, and so to soothe his soul, what does he do? He drinks some alcohol. He drinks some wine. It says that he was a husbandman. He grew a vineyard. He raised up a vineyard. He grew his own grapes. He made that wine literally from scratch. Takes the grapes, crushes them, ferments the whole thing, goes through the whole alcohol wine-making process, drinks a whole bunch of wine, gets drunk, and then he's in his tent and he is naked because, at times when you're really drunk, it can get pretty hot. And here comes Ham, one of his sons, and Ham goes into the tent. He sees his father naked, and what does Ham do? He mocks his father. He scoffs at his father, and the Bible says that he left the tent and he went to his brothers and he said, oh, look, dad's naked. And he mocked his father while his father was naked. While his father was naked. And so here was Noah suffering in the vine, suffering in the fruit of the vine, suffering in his state of inebriation, in his state of drunkenness. He drank the fruit of the vine and he was suffering. And there was Christ on the cross, suffering the cup of his suffering, enduring through the cup of his suffering. Because what did Jesus say in the Last Supper? He said, this is my blood. He took the chalice filled with wine and he said, this is my blood, which is given for the redemption of many. And so when Christ was in the Garden of Gethsemane, he was suffering because he knew he was about to die. And he tells his father, he says, let this cup pass by me. If it is your will, let this cup pass by me. What was the cup? The cup of his suffering, which is symbolized as what? As wine. And there is Noah suffering. He drinks of the fruit of the vine, wine, and he is suffering. And so here comes Ham mocking his father while he was suffering after drinking of the fruit of the vine. And there was Christ on the cross suffering the cup of his suffering. And there were the people on Mount Golgotha scoffing at him, laughing at him. There were the thieves laughing at him. Just like as the Armenians were suffering, there were the Turks who hated the Armenians, scoffing at the Armenians in their suffering. And it's amazing, when Paul had his vision of Christ on the road to Damascus, Christ tells Paul, and at this point he was Saul, Christ says, Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? Well, was Saul persecuting Christ personally? No, he was persecuting Christ's church, because Christ identifies himself with his church. And therefore, Christ identifies his suffering with the suffering of his church. And so the life of Christ is reflected in the life of the church. And here are the Armenians being butchered by the Turks, who are Muslim, and the ones who orchestrated the Armenian Genocide were atheists who believed in the theory of evolution, and they saw their butchering of the Armenians as a way to demonstrate Darwinian evolution, the Darwinian struggle for survival, and the Darwinian creed of survival of the fittest. And they said that their superiority was demonstrated in the fact that they were the ones butchering the Armenians, and the Armenians demonstrated their own weakness as an organism because they were the ones being butchered. So it was an atheist Muslim conspiracy, but there were also several Jewish people who were involved in the Armenian Genocide. And Grigoris Balakian talks about this Jewish official who mocked this Armenian man before he was about to die. And there is another case that Mr. Grigoris Balakian brings up. So it talks about how Grigoris Balakian, how he escaped to this city called Incirlik. And while he was in Incirlik, he met a Jewish man who was also working with the Ottomans. And in fact, he was a Fink. And he would rat out the Armenians to the Ottoman authorities so that those Armenians would be killed. So this Jewish guy was a murderer. He murdered Armenians. And his name was Blanc. He doesn't give us his last name. He just says his name was Blanc. And it says here we met a Jew named Blanc, head of the local warehouses, whose Armenophobic reputation, meaning he hated Armenians, had reached Bakhche. With devilish delight in catching one's prey, he asked me who I was. By this time, I had decided to drop my pseudonym, Garabedian, because he had a fake name, Garabedian, my pseudonym, Garabedian, and take the German Jewish name, Herb Braunstein. So this Armenian guy, he said, listen, I'm Jewish. My name is Herb Braunstein. Blanc, who as an informant had caused the arrest of many an Armenian in hiding, did his best to unmask me by interrogating me in German. Doing my best to evade him, I said I was in a hurry and I left the restaurant. So here is another Jewish individual who was working to murder Armenians. And it's amazing. No one really talks about this history, but at the same time, we have to be balanced. We have to be balanced. And we can't say, well, all the Jews were this way. No, there were Jewish people who were evil, who were working with the Ottomans to murder Christians. And at the same time, though, there was a Jewish woman, because we have to be balanced. We have to be balanced. There was a Jewish woman by the name of Sarah Aronson. And she saw with her own eyes massacred Armenians. And it says here on our wiki page, On her way from Istanbul to Haifa, Aronson witnessed part of the Armenian Genocide. She testified to seeing hundreds of bodies of Armenian men, women, children, and babies. Sick Armenians being loaded onto trains, with the dead being tossed out and replaced by the living. After her trip to Haifa, any allusions to Armenians upset her greatly. According to Chaim Herzog, Aronson decided to assist British forces as a result of what she had witnessed. So here is a case of a Jewish woman who was adamantly against the Ottomans as a result of her seeing droves of dead Armenians. So we shouldn't go around saying, well, that's just the Jews. But at the same time, we have to acknowledge historical reality. There were Jewish people who were involved in the Armenian Genocide. And here is another historical fact that we should also acknowledge. Theodor Herzl, the father of Zionism, didn't mind actually doing something that would kill Armenians. So what am I talking about? Theodor Herzl was desperate for money to fund his Zionist cause. He went to the Ottoman Empire, he went to the Ottoman government, he spoke with the Sultan, and he said, could you give us money to fund our Zionist cause? And the Sultan said, yeah, sure, I'll back your Zionist project. Here's something that I want you to do for me. I want you to go to the Armenian resistance fighters who are resisting the Ottoman Empire, and I want you to convince them to drop their weapons. And if you can convince them to drop their weapons, then I will back your Zionist cause. Theodor Herzl said, deal. He didn't give a damn. So he went to the Armenians, he requested a meeting with the leadership of the Armenian resistance, and they agreed to have a meeting with him, and then they met with him, and they said, okay, what the hell do you want? And he said, yeah, the Sultan says drop your weapons and he will accept you peacefully. And they said, screw you, we all know damn well that if we drop our weapons, we're dead. And they were absolutely right, because this is stuff that the Ottomans would do. They would deceive people, and Grigoris Balakian talks about this in his book, how the Ottomans would trick Armenians into thinking that if they would just follow the rules, then nobody would get hurt, and then so the Armenians would believe it, they would follow the rules, and then they would get butchered. And so Theodor Herzl didn't mind murdering Armenians. He didn't give a damn, all because he wanted Ottoman backing for his cause. And there is another interesting story in this book, and it recounts how Grigoris Balakian escaped this railway construction site. They were killing all the workers. He knew that he was eventually going to be killed if he stayed there, so he escaped. And before he escapes, this is really interesting. Before he escapes, there is and this is what really got him to escape. This is what convinced him that he really needed to get the hell out of this place. There was a Jewish guy who was working for the Ottomans. He doesn't give his name, but it says that he worked in the tobacco business. And he approaches Grigoris Balakian and he says, oh, Father Grigoris, well, he doesn't call him Father, but he says, Grigoris Balakian, don't you want to convert to Islam so you can survive? And Grigoris Balakian says, yes, I've been meaning to want to convert to Islam. How about we set up a meeting and then I'll convert and I'll say this Shahadatan and all this stuff. And this Jewish guy says, splendid, I'll set up the meeting. And it turns out that this Jewish guy actually converted to Islam himself, yes. So he goes to his German friend, Klaus, and he says, Klaus, I really need to get the hell out of here, because I would rather die than convert to Islam. So if they're going to tell me to convert, I'm just going to get martyred, and I really don't want to be martyred right now, so you got to get me out of here. And Klaus says, well, there's really nothing I can do at this point. But another German guy comes along, and he says, I can help you out. Here is a letter, and it has my signature on it. You're going to go to this other part of the Ottoman Empire, this other part of Turkey. You're going to meet with a German friend of mine. Give him this letter, and he will know that I want him to take care of you. He says, okay. He takes the letter. This German guy leads him into this little train cart and gets him the hell out of there. So he goes to this new area, And while he's there, he meets with this German gentleman who gives him housing. And there are these two German guys, I think they were both engineers, who were his neighbors. And they met with him every night to discuss politics and whatnot. And these two German engineers, one evening, they're having dinner, and they're talking about the Armenians. And they're talking about how much they hate Armenians. Now, this Armenian priest, Father Grigoris Balakian, he's telling everyone that he's a Jew. He's telling everyone, my name's Herr Braunstein. So these German guys, they think that he's Jewish. So they're just nonchalantly talking about how much they hate Armenians and how much they agree with what the Ottoman Empire is doing to the Armenians. They are agreeing with the genocide. And Father Grigoris Balakian is so heartbroken by this, he's so angered by this, that he just tells them straight up, listen, I'm not Jewish, I'm Armenian. And I went through the genocide. I saw the genocide with my own eyes. And the Germans go silent, and the whole room becomes very tense, and there's this very awkward moment, and they just stop talking to each other, and they never had dinner again after that, and they never met again after that. And I'm reading the story and I'm thinking to myself, wait a second. These two German engineers had no issue with Balakian when he was Jewish. When they thought he was Jewish, they had no issues with him. Nothing. Once they found out he was Armenian, then they hated him. I'm thinking to myself, they had no issue with him being Jewish, but they had an issue with him when it turned out he was Armenian. And these Germans had no idea that not too long from that point, the Germans would turn on the Jews. So they had no issue with Jews during World War I, but during World War II, boom, they turned on the Jews. So here were these Jewish officials working for the Ottoman Empire, assisting in the Armenian genocide, and there were lots of Jewish people in the German military, and they didn't really give a damn about the Armenians for the most part. I mean, some of the Jews that I'm talking about, they didn't give a shit about the Armenians. They were on top of the world. They were working for the Ottomans. They assisted in the genocide. They didn't care. And the Germans had nothing against Jewish people at this point, but the Germans hated the Armenians because the Armenians were an ally of their arch nemesis, the Russians. And in fact, Grigoris Balakian talks about how while the German engineers were really nice for the most part, the German military was atrociously anti-Armenian. They were very sinister against the Armenians. They would mock at the Armenians, calling them Christian Jews. So there was some Jew hatred there. I would say there was the seed of anti-Semitism, and it was growing, but it had not taken the shape that it did during the Holocaust. But nonetheless, it was nowhere near as big as the anti-Armenian sentiment at that time. They were calling the Armenians Christian Jews, and they were saying, you deserve to be genocided. And in fact, Grigoris Balakian tells us that thousands of German officers would pass through the Ottoman train station where he worked at when they were constructing this railway, and they would look at the Armenian workers and they would say, yeah, you guys deserve what you're getting. To hell with you Armenians. Damn you Armenians. You guys are just Russian partisans. You're pro-Russia. You're with the enemy. We hate you. So at that time, the Germans supported the Holocaust of the Armenians. And here were these Jewish guys thinking, yeah, we're going to kill Armenians too. Yeah, to hell with these Armenians. And then, boom, years later, the very Germans who were once okay with Jewish people turned on the Jews. And that reminds me of what Mr. Hamamjian said. The Jewish official was mocking him as he was facing his death, and he said, next year in Constantinople. And Mr. Hamamjian said, be glad I am going to my death. They are cleaning up the Armenians. The field is left to the Jews. When you are an oppressor, when you are supporting genocide, you think you're on top of the world. And you have no idea that one day, the very type of reign of terror that you are unleashing on your victims will be done unto you and imposed on you. You do not know when the tables will be turned on you or your own people. And look at what's happening in the Middle East. You have Israel murdering Gazans, doing war crimes, and the Israelis are now talking about how they're going to take more Gazan territory, how they are going to continue to push more Gazans out of their homes. They say, oh, it's for their safety. We just want to destroy Hamas. This is a land grab, and this is about expanding Israel's settlements and making Gaza Jewish. Well, there is a prophecy in the Bible that talks about Gaza. It's from the prophet Zephaniah, and it says in Zephaniah, Gaza will be abandoned. I find that very interesting. Gaza will be abandoned. This is in Zephaniah chapter 2. Gaza will be abandoned. So let's say that the Israelis take over Gaza and they make it Jewish. Well, what happens when this prophecy is fulfilled? Gaza will be abandoned. What's going to make Gaza abandoned? Well, what's Turkey talking about right now? Turkey is talking about what? Invading Israel for the cause of defending the Palestinians. And I believe that there is going to be a second Holocaust. Now, I'm not saying that it's good. I don't want it to happen. I'm not saying that it's good. I'm very anti-Nazi. I have to make that very clear. But what I am saying is that if you support genocide, or when you support genocide, understand that genocide may just happen to you in the future. So have empathy and don't sit there thinking that you're on top of the world. Have empathy with those who are suffering through genocide, because one day you may be a victim of genocide yourself. Anyway, those are my thoughts. You guys just heard some theology. God bless.